So the next group that we're talking about are muscles that are actually in the upper extremity. So this is where we're going to use those nerves. So we talked about axillary nerve. Remember when we did the brachial plexus, we looked at the axillary nerve, which is actually passing through here. Here's that letter M again. So musculocutaneous is the one we're going to be talking about in this group. And then the next group we're talking about is median and ulnar. All right, but I just wanted to kind of point that M out to you. So when you learn it by compartments, and again, back to page 90.
Oh, that's why you point out
You can leave that part of my daughter liking.
Oh, that wasn't
recording.
It wasn't recording.
All right, I was going to say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
She'll tell me if that goes up on.
Yeah, look out, I can get a lot more than 40.
So on page 90 is the table with the nerves and the compartments. And the muscles we're talking about are on page 96. Okay?
So the reason you keep pointing out the M is because it's muscular.
Well, yeah, it just helps in locating the different components that we're talking about. So we're looking at muscles of the anterior arm. The nerve for anterior arm compartment is musculocutaneous. And there are 3 muscles in this compartment, all of them innervated by musculocutaneous. So we have coracobrachialis, biceps brachii, and brachialis. And you'll notice that each of them has some form of brachii, which is our word for arm. Brachial. Exactly. The humerus. Now, since these muscles are in the anterior compartment, they're going to cross either the shoulder or the elbow joint in the anterior plane. So what did we say were our movements if we cross the joint anteriorly for the upper extremity? Flexion. All right. If it's crossing the shoulder joint, it can also do adduction. So at the shoulder, our movement is flexion or adduction. All right. At the elbow, it's flexion, or we add another pair of terms, pronation or supination. All right. That's moving the radius. So if we look at the upper extremity in the anatomical position with the palm facing forward, notice that the 2 bones are parallel, and then the hand is supine. And when we pronate, the radius crosses over the ulna. The ulna does not move. So supinate, we go back to the parallel position. Pronate, radius crosses over. So a muscle that is going to either pronate or supinate the forearm has to attach to the radius. Does that make sense? That's the only bone that moves when we do that movement. Any muscle that crosses the elbow joint anteriorly is going to do flexion, but our primary mover, our agonist for flexion of the elbow, is going to insert onto the ulna, because that's the bone of the elbow joint. The humerus and the ulna do the elbow joint, our flexion extension. So if a muscle is crossing and it's going to be our strongest flexor, it has to pull on the ulna. But any muscle crossing will do flexion if it crosses anteriorly. Okay? So we're going to have muscles that are down here at the lower area that really their major function is to flex the wrist. But because they cross the elbow, they're going to contribute to flexion. They're not the major mover, but they contribute to that. All right, so let's look at the 3 muscles of the anterior arm itself, and having its origin from the coracoid process. See if I thought I had one that showed just the muscle here. From the coracoid process, we have the coracobrachialis. So on our anterior view, here's the coracoid process. There's something that's not right about this. Oh, here. Let me just play around artistically here a minute. I don't know. I'll leave it at that. Coracoid process to the humerus. And this is a very slender muscle.
This is anterior.
This is anterior view, yes. Because it's anterior compartment. So this is the coracobrachialis muscle. Has its origin and insertion in its name. But you'll notice it only crosses one joint. So it's not going to do anything at the elbow. It crosses the shoulder joint anteriorly, so it's going to function in adduction and in flexion of the humerus. I'm going to skip biceps brachii and draw the deeper muscle first so that you can see it, some of the things I learned from the morning lecture. So brachialis crosses only one joint. It crosses the elbow joint. It is the agonist, the strongest muscle for flexion of the elbow, which means it inserts onto the ulna. It starts about halfway along the anterior arm, and it's a thick belly of a muscle, provides the height to the biceps brachii. So you cannot see this one directly on your models because it's covered up by biceps brachii. That's the brachialis muscle. So looking at the arm component here, right here is coracobrachialis. See how skinny it is? Right there, very short. Then we have biceps brachii, which covers up the brachialis. So the best place to see the brachialis is right here. Okay, it forms the bed for the biceps. It's actually, you're seeing it here and here. It's anterior to the humerus. It is deep to the biceps brachii, but it's not in the posterior compartment. Okay. In 493, they have shorter models that don't fall apart as much. They're not as realistic, but they're easier to work with. And the entire biceps brachii comes off, and you can actually see the biceps, the brachialis on its shaft. So I have some of those images on the practice quiz where you're seeing the brachialis there. And then here is biceps brachii on the anterior component. All right, so brachialis crosses only the elbow joint. So the only thing it can do is flex the elbow because it inserts onto the ulna, not the radius. It's not going to do pronation or supination. It's the agonist, the strongest muscle for flexing the elbow. And then the third muscle does both. It crosses the shoulder joint, but it inserts onto the radius, and so it crosses the elbow joint as well. Biceps means it has two heads, two tendons. And so one is called the long head because its tendon, which looks shorter here, actually has its origin from the top of the glenoid fossa and has to cross over the head and down. And the short head comes from the coracoid process, just like the coracoid brachialis. So I'm going to draw those tendons in blue just to emphasize that. So here is the tendon of the long head, passes between the lesser and greater tubercles. Remember the intertubercular sulcus. And then coming from the coracoid process, we have the tendon for the short head. And then the muscle itself is going to insert onto the radial tuberosity because it's going to do supination. That's its primary, strongest force of contraction is in supination. Let me do that in a different color. I had a green one. biceps brachii, coming to attach to the radial tuberosity.
So just like the anterior and posterior digastric, you're gonna, when we get tested, we'll have to.
Long head and short head, yeah. But this is the same muscle. So when you look at its movement, because it crosses the shoulder joint, it's going to do flexion and adduction of the humerus. Because it crosses the elbow joint, it's going to do flexion of the elbow. But because it inserts on the radius, it's going to do supination. So its strongest function is in supination. Now, if we lose the musculocutaneous nerve, will we not be able to do any flexion or adduction of the humerus? Will that be absent? No, because we have those muscles we talked about earlier. We have the pectoralis major. We have deltoid that will still do flexion and adduction of the shoulder. Okay? And as we move into the anterior arm compartment, we have muscles that have their origin from here and cross the elbow, primarily to flex the wrist, but because they cross the elbow, they're also going to flex the elbow. So even if we lose brachialis, we have other muscles that will flex the elbow. All right? So there's a redundancy here. Yes, Susan? Supination is turning the palm up like in a cup of soup.
No, soup for you.
Oh, was I doing the other movement?
No, you did it the other day when you did it.
Oh, okay. So supination is turning, so anatomical position, you're already in supination. Okay? And then pronation is turning palm down, or posterior. And then supination is back up again. So cup of soup, or like when you're laying prone, face down on the ground.
Proposed.
Yeah.
To get proposed to.
Okay.
Hands down.
All right.
That's how I remember it.
That was so long ago for me. So those are the three muscles of the anterior compartment. All right, and then if you recognize which joints they cross, that will give you a clue as to what their function is, even if you forget the specific insertion.
This might be a little off topic, but if someone loses like an arm and they put a prosthetic on it, how are they able to move it?
It depends, because they still have, if they still have part of the humerus, then they still have pec major. And depending on high, how, or low, they might have coracobrachialis, but at least certainly parts of it. And they usually use the electrical energy of the muscles for that movement. All right, so now let's move to the next compartment. And this is the anterior compartment of the arm. The anterior compartment of arm and forearm, I consider to be the most difficult muscles to learn in the entire body, just because they all look alike. Okay? So, in light of that, pay attention to orientations. So I still, I can name a muscle when I see it, but when I was learning the muscles, I would pick a specific muscle and name everything in relationship to that. So if I was taking a quiz or an exam, and this muscle was tagged right here, I would start, my favorite muscle actually isn't on here, but it's missing, brachioradialis, and then I would name all the muscles in turn, all the way around, until I got to the muscle that was tagged. You do that over and over and over, and you learn to recognize them.
This one?
Yeah, that's a brachioradialis. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But at least recognize I'm in the upper extremity. All right, you'd be surprised the number of people that put down posterior muscles when they're talking about upper extremity, or put down lower extremity muscles. Recognize what compartment you're in. If you're in the anterior arm compartment, especially the forearm, it's more likely to be a flexor something. Don't put extensor carpi ulnaris when you're looking at the anterior forearm. Don't put extensor carpi ulnaris when the tendon is going to the thumb. Ulnaris is the little finger side. All right, so take the time to figure out the orientation and where you are. We've got quite a bit of lab time with this unit, so even though the quizzes and exams are on photographs, those are hard to make sense of unless you've been working with the models. Okay, So use the open lab time with Jeff. We've got an additional the last Friday of class and part of that Thursday as well, since we're a little bit ahead of time. Utilize that time so that when you see the models and stuff, you've got a dimensional, three-dimensional aspect to that. Another thing I want to just take a few moments here to talk about is I never studied with flashcards. I use flashcards, actually, when I wrote a paper, I'd put my different contents from my sources on the papers and then organize my cards as I organize my paper. But flashcards work really well, even better for the muscles than they do for the bones. You can put the name of the muscle on one side or a picture, print it off in black and white, and on the back side put the name or the function, attachments, and then that's just the minimal. That's like going through the list and seeing the picture and naming the muscle, all right, or seeing the function and naming the innervation. But then, and these are in your study objectives, you can group them. You can start doing some, now I call that vertical learning. You can group them and start doing some correlations. So here's a stack of cards, which are, all of these cards are found in an anterior compartment, arm, leg, thigh. All of these muscles function to do extension of anything. All of these muscles have the coracoid process as a point of attachment. All of these muscles insert onto the radius. And there's innumerable different ways in which you can make your brain think about different combinations, kind of like we did with the cranial nerves. Instead of just learning the functions of the cranial nerves, which ones do the, innervate the eye, which ones are taste, which ones are for speech, and you start combining them in different groups and getting a little bit more in depth with your ability to explore their functions. And so doing that with the flashcards helps you to do that. And when you do the flashcards, if you want to do images, you can draw them. A really good source, I'm trying to see if is from the University of Washington, radiology. This is an address that you can use, but in a moment I'll show you a much easier way. The reason I like them, and they have mostly extremity, arm and leg, upper extremity and lower extremity, is because they have the muscle isolated. And you can see the attachments, you can see the origin and insertions. And I use some of those images for your study objective multiple choice, not multiple choice, but the illustrations that you're identifying. So I use Google, and so what I did to find this image was I just put in brachialis muscle, and you get a bunch of thumbprints. And by now I've learned to recognize which ones come from this site, but it's this image right here. And when you click on it, you can see that when you just hold a button down that it's coming from that particular, that's not the one I want. From so different sites will use them that are not the University of Washington, but when you click on it, you just want to make sure, see that's the bodybuilding site, so that's not the one I want. But you can see those different images, and then find one that matches. Yes. All right, I can't read here. Oh, I can't read. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So on the side over here, you can see a bunch of different muscles, and like I said, mostly extremity. These are from the upper extremity. And if you go to navigation, then you can get different groups. So up here, it shows the different areas. And then you can just take this picture and copy it and paste it, either to a Word document or to a PowerPoint slide. Print it out in black and white. You can put about, 10 or 15 on one page and print them off if you want to do it in color or black and white and save ink, and then put that on your diagram, color it in or whatever. And so you can see at a glance without this all being covered up by the deltoid or something else, the biceps brachii has two tendons. And you can see the tendon structure. So it makes it easier to understand the placement of that muscle when you see it as an individual muscle, which is why I have those exercises in the study guide part, is to focus on what structure is this muscle attached to. It's coming from the styloid process and going to the hyoid. So use that as a trigger, as a help in what you're actually looking at. Okay, so going back, if I may. So we're going to do anterior arm, and then we'll leave posterior, anterior forearm, and we'll leave posterior arm and forearm and hand for Thursday. This area has 3 layers of muscle. There are 4 muscles in the superficial layer, 1 muscle in the intermediate layer, and 2 muscles in the deep layer. So again, recognizing what layer you're looking at will help to orient you. Especially on the lecture exam, even the lab exam, since it's multiple choice, the lecture exam, you may not know the answer right off the bat. But don't give up, because you do know a lot about the material. And you just need to ask yourself, okay, so if the question is, which of the following muscles pulls the tongue up and back as in swallowing? Well, you know it's tongue, so the muscle has to end in glossus. And if you're going to pull the muscle up and back, the origin has to be above and behind styloglossus. All right, so even if you didn't know that the styloglossus was involved in swallowing, by reading the question and looking at the choices, you can figure it out. So don't just assume you have no idea and guess. What do I know about these muscles? What do I know about the question? And of anything we've talked about, I mean, with the nervous system, the, which of the following structures is involved in memory, you just kind of had to know it. But here you can just ask yourself, okay, if I know this and I know this, what can I assume or infer from the information is going to happen? So try to do that instead of just